You're tired of feeling like you're living in a world where racism and bias are still rampant, despite the progress we've made. Every time you turn on the news, you see another story of police brutality, another example of systemic inequality. You feel like you're stuck in a never-ending cycle of frustration and anger, and you don't know how to break free. You've tried to have conversations with friends and family about these issues, but they often devolve into defensiveness and blame. You feel like you're fighting a losing battle, and it's exhausting. The truth is, you're not just fighting against racism and bias, you're also fighting against your own implicit biases, the ones that you're not even aware of. That's why you need a new approach, one that doesn't just focus on changing the world around you, but also on changing yourself. Biased by Jennifer L. Eberhardt, Ph.D., is a book that shows you how to do just that, by understanding the power of labels, the impact of implicit bias on policing, and the ways in which residential segregation perpetuates inequality. In this summary, you'll discover how to overcome your own biases and become a part of creating a more inclusive and equitable society. You keep struggling to understand why you sometimes misjudge people from different racial backgrounds. You're not a racist, but you've caught yourself making assumptions or having trouble recognizing faces from other ethnic groups. It's frustrating and embarrassing, and you wish you could overcome this bias. The truth is, you're not alone in this struggle. This phenomenon is known as the other race effect, and it's a fundamental aspect of how our brains process faces. The other race effect refers to the phenomenon where people are better at recognizing faces of their own race than faces of other races. This effect is not driven by racism or prejudice, but rather by how our brains process faces and the impact of experience and exposure on face recognition. Let's dive deeper into this concept. You see, when you're constantly exposed to people from your own racial group, your brain becomes more efficient at recognizing the subtle differences between faces within that group. However, when you're faced with people from other racial groups, your brain struggles to distinguish between them. This is because your brain is wired to recognize patterns, and when you're not exposed to a particular pattern, you're not as good at recognizing it. It's not that you're intentionally trying to be biased. It's just that your brain is doing what it's designed to do. The other race effect is a pervasive issue that affects many areas of life, including policing, education, and social interactions. Understanding implicit bias is crucial in promoting a more inclusive and equitable society. By recognizing the other race effect and its implications, individuals and organizations can take steps to address bias and promote greater understanding and empathy. For instance, have you ever noticed how you sometimes struggle to tell apart people from other racial groups, but you can easily recognize your friends and family from your own group? That's the other race effect in action. It's not just about recognizing faces, it's about how our brains process information and make decisions based on that information. This effect can have serious consequences, such as misidentification of suspects in criminal cases or unequal treatment of individuals in education and employment. The author of Biased shares a personal experience that illustrates this point. When she moved to a predominantly white suburb as a teenager, she found it difficult to distinguish between white faces. This experience highlights the importance of exposure and experience in shaping our ability to recognize faces. As she notes, our brains are not hardwired to recognize faces, but rather are shaped by our experiences and environment. This quote resonates deeply, as it acknowledges that our brains are capable of change and growth, but only if we provide them with the right experiences and exposure. Another example that comes to mind is the London taxi drivers study. The study found that London taxi drivers had enlarged posterior hippocampi due to their extensive experience navigating the city's streets. This study demonstrates the impact of experience on brain development and function. Similarly, when we're exposed to different racial groups, our brains can adapt and become more efficient at recognizing faces from those groups. However, if we're not exposed to those groups, our brains won't have the opportunity to develop that skill. The London taxi drivers study shows that our brains are capable of reorganizing themselves in response to new experiences, a concept known as neuroplasticity. This concept is crucial in understanding how we can overcome the other race effect and develop a more inclusive and empathetic mindset. The other race effect is not just limited to face recognition. It can also affect our perceptions and attitudes towards people from other racial groups. When we're not exposed to diverse groups, we may rely on stereotypes or biases to fill in the gaps. This can lead to misunderstandings, miscommunications, and even discrimination. By acknowledging the other race effect and its implications, we can take steps to address these biases and promote greater understanding and empathy. For example, imagine you're a manager at a company and you're tasked with hiring a new employee. If you're not exposed to diverse candidates, you may unintentionally discriminate against them due to your own biases. However, if you make a conscious effort to seek out diverse candidates and expose yourself to different perspectives, you can reduce the impact of the other race effect and make more informed decisions. So, what changes when you apply this understanding of the other race effect? For one, you become more aware of your own biases and how they may be influencing your decisions. You start to recognize that your brain is wired to recognize patterns and that you need to make a conscious effort to expose yourself to different racial groups. You become more empathetic and understanding towards people from other backgrounds, and you're more likely to challenge your own assumptions and stereotypes. Imagine being able to navigate social situations with confidence, knowing that you're not unintentionally offending someone due to your own biases. Imagine being able to make more informed decisions, free from the influence of implicit bias. That's the power of understanding the other race effect. To start addressing implicit bias, you can take small steps to increase your exposure to different racial groups. You can start by engaging in diversity and inclusion training, participating in community outreach programs, or promoting diverse hiring practices. You can also make a conscious effort to seek out diverse perspectives and challenge your own assumptions and stereotypes. For example, you can start by reading books or articles written by authors from different racial backgrounds, or by attending cultural events that celebrate diversity. The key is to take small, consistent steps towards increasing your exposure and empathy. By doing so, you can reduce the impact of the other race effect and become a more inclusive and empathetic person. One specific action you can take today is to seek out a diverse perspective. This could be as simple as reading an article or watching a video that challenges your own assumptions and biases. You could also reach out to someone from a different racial background and ask them to share their experiences and perspectives with you. The key is to take that first step, no matter how small it may seem. When you do, you'll start to notice a shift in your own perceptions and attitudes. You'll become more aware of your own biases and more empathetic towards people from other backgrounds. You'll start to recognize the other race effect in action, and you'll be able to take steps to address it. So, take that first step today and start moving towards a more inclusive and empathetic mindset. Now that we've explored this powerful insight, let's move on to the next transformative learning. You keep feeling like you're making assumptions about others without even realizing it, and it's affecting your relationships and interactions. You try to be open-minded, but somehow, you still end up judging people based on limited information. This is frustrating because you know you're not alone in this. Everyone around you seems to be doing the same. You see it in the news, in social media, and even in your own social circle. It's as if we're all stuck in this cycle of making quick judgments about others, and it's hard to break free. The reason you're stuck in this cycle is that your brain is wired to categorize and simplify complex information. This fundamental function of the human brain is meant to help you navigate the world more efficiently, but it can also lead to the formation of biases and stereotypes. The content of our categories is culturally generated and specific, which means that the way we think about different groups of people is shaped by our surroundings and upbringing. This can lead to biases and stereotypes that are deeply ingrained, making it difficult to recognize and overcome them. But why does this matter to you? Well, think about the last time you met someone new. Did you find yourself making assumptions about them based on their appearance, accent, or job title? Maybe you thought to yourself, oh, they're from that part of town, they must be a certain way. Or, they work in that industry, they must be like all the others I've met. These kinds of assumptions might seem harmless, but they can lead to misunderstandings, miscommunications, and even conflicts. By recognizing how our brains simplify complex information, we can start to address these biases and stereotypes and become more empathetic and understanding towards others. Let's look at a powerful example from the book Biased by Jennifer L. Eberhardt, Ph.D. The story of the Asian woman who was robbed by a group of young black men is a striking illustration of how categorization and bias can lead to oversimplification and stereotyping. The woman's perception of the robbers was influenced by her existing biases and stereotypes, which led her to make assumptions about their character and intentions. This example demonstrates how our categorization process can lead to errors and biases, and how these biases can have real-world consequences. Another example that comes to mind is the Oakland Police Department's Riders scandal. This notorious case of police misconduct, in which a group of officers planted drugs on innocent individuals, leading to false arrests and convictions, is a devastating example of categorization and bias in policing. The officers' biases and stereotypes led them to target specific groups of people, resulting in grave injustices and harm to the community. This example highlights the importance of recognizing and addressing categorization and bias, not just in our personal lives, but also in institutions and systems of power. As you reflect on these examples, you might be wondering how you can start to recognize and overcome your own biases and stereotypes. The key is to become more aware of your thought patterns and to challenge your assumptions. When you meet someone new, try to catch yourself making assumptions about them. Ask yourself, what am I basing this assumption on? Or, is this assumption really fair? By being more mindful of your thoughts and actions, you can start to break free from the cycle of categorization and bias. The reason this is so important is that it can completely change the way you interact with others. Imagine being able to approach each person you meet with a completely open mind without any preconceptions or assumptions. Imagine being able to listen to their story, to understand their perspective, and to connect with them on a deeper level. This is what's possible when you start to recognize and overcome your own biases and stereotypes. So, what becomes possible when you start to address categorization and bias? For one, you'll start to notice that your relationships with others become more authentic and meaningful. You'll be able to connect with people from different backgrounds and perspectives, and you'll be more empathetic and understanding. You'll also become more aware of the ways in which biases and stereotypes can affect your decisions and actions, and you'll be able to make more informed choices. Imagine waking up each morning, feeling more confident in your ability to navigate complex social situations. You'll be able to approach each interaction with a sense of curiosity and openness, rather than fear and uncertainty. You'll be able to build stronger, more meaningful relationships, and you'll be more effective in your personal and professional life. This is what's possible when you start to address categorization and bias, and it's an incredibly powerful feeling. To start making this change, try something simple. Next time you meet someone new, take a moment to notice your thoughts and assumptions. Ask yourself, what am I basing this assumption on? Or, is this assumption really fair? Then, make a conscious effort to listen to the person's story, to understand their perspective, and to connect with them on a deeper level. This small action can have a profound impact on your relationships and interactions, and it's a great first step towards addressing categorization and bias. When you take this first step, you'll start to notice a shift in your perspective. You'll become more aware of your own biases and stereotypes, and you'll start to see the world in a new light. You'll realize that everyone has a unique story and perspective, and that assumptions and stereotypes can be hurtful and limiting. By taking this small action, you'll be taking the first step towards a more empathetic, understanding, and compassionate way of being. And that's a truly powerful thing. With that understanding in place, let's dive into another crucial insight from the book. You're tired of feeling like the system is stacked against you, like no matter how hard you try, you're always going to be judged and treated unfairly by those in power. You're frustrated with the countless stories of police brutality, of innocent lives lost, and of communities torn apart by mistrust and fear. You wonder how this can still be happening in today's society, and you feel helpless to do anything about it. But what if you knew that there was a root cause to all of this, a hidden bias that's influencing the actions of those in power, including police officers? What if you could understand how this bias works and how it's affecting your life and the lives of those around you? The concept of implicit bias in policing is a crucial one to grasp, as it has a profound impact on the way law enforcement interacts with communities of color. Implicit bias refers to the unconscious attitudes and stereotypes that we all hold, which can influence our judgments and actions. In the context of policing, implicit bias can lead to racial disparities in stops, searches, and arrests, as well as the use of force and police brutality. This is not just a matter of a few rogue officers. It's a systemic issue that affects the entire institution of law enforcement. Why does this matter to you? Maybe you've had a personal experience with the police that left you feeling uneasy or mistreated. Maybe you have a loved one who's been affected by police brutality. Or maybe you're just tired of feeling like you're walking on eggshells, never knowing when you might be stopped or searched simply because of the color of your skin. Whatever your experience, it's essential to understand how implicit bias is driving these outcomes. When you're stopped by a police officer, you want to know that you're being treated fairly, that the officer is making decisions based on the facts of the situation, not on unconscious biases. But the reality is that implicit bias can influence even the most well-intentioned officers, leading to devastating consequences. The story of Terrence Crutcher is a heartbreaking example of this. Crutcher, a 40-year-old black man, was shot to death by a police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, despite being unarmed and posing no threat. The officer, Betty Shelby, claimed that she feared for her life, but video footage of the incident told a different story. Crutcher's death was a tragedy, and it's a stark reminder of the dangers of implicit bias in policing. When officers are influenced by biases and stereotypes, they're more likely to misinterpret situations, to see threats where none exist, and to use force unnecessarily. This is not just a matter of individual officers. It's a systemic issue that requires a systemic solution. Another example that comes to mind is the case of Michael Brown, the 18-year-old black man who was fatally shot by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. Brown's death sparked widespread protests and calls for police reform, as it highlighted the deep-seated mistrust between law enforcement and communities of color. The investigation into Brown's death revealed a pattern of racial bias and stereotyping within the Ferguson Police Department, which contributed to the tragic outcome. These cases are not isolated incidents. They're part of a larger pattern of racial disparities in policing. When you look at the data, it's clear that communities of color are disproportionately affected by police brutality and mistreatment. This is not just a matter of individual officers. It's a systemic issue that requires a systemic solution. So, what can be done to address implicit bias in policing? The first step is to acknowledge the problem, to recognize that implicit bias is a real and pervasive issue that affects us all. From there, law enforcement agencies can take steps to provide training and education on implicit bias, to promote diversity and inclusion, and to implement policies and procedures that address bias. This might involve community outreach programs, diverse hiring practices, and ongoing training and education for officers. It's not a quick fix, but it's a necessary one. When you understand how implicit bias works, you can start to see the world in a different way. You can start to recognize the ways in which bias is influencing your own thoughts and actions, and you can take steps to address it. Imagine being able to walk down the street without feeling like you're being watched or judged. Imagine being able to interact with police officers without feeling a sense of fear or unease. This is not just a pipe dream, it's a reality that's within our reach. When we address implicit bias in policing, we can start to build trust and cooperation between law enforcement and the communities they serve. We can start to create a more just and equitable society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. So, what can you do today to start addressing implicit bias in policing? One small step you can take is to educate yourself about the issue, to learn more about how implicit bias works and how it's affecting your community. You can start by reading about the experiences of others, by listening to their stories and learning from their perspectives. You can also get involved in local efforts to address police reform, by attending community meetings or volunteering with organizations that are working to promote justice and equity. When you take these steps, you'll start to notice a difference. You'll start to feel more empowered, more confident in your ability to create change. You'll start to see the world in a different way, to recognize the ways in which bias is influencing your thoughts and actions, and you'll start to feel a sense of hope, a sense that a better future is possible. So, don't wait any longer to take action. Start today by taking one small step towards addressing implicit bias in policing. The future is worth it. Now let's turn our attention to the final key learning that can truly change how you approach this. You keep feeling like you're stuck in a never-ending cycle of inequality and injustice, and you can't seem to put your finger on why it's so hard to break free. Every time you try to make a change, you're met with resistance, and it feels like the system is rigged against you. You're not alone in this feeling. Millions of people are struggling to understand why their communities are still segregated, why they don't have access to the same resources and opportunities as others, and why they're constantly facing bias and stereotypes. The reason you're stuck is that you're not just fighting against individual prejudices, but against a complex web of historical and systemic issues that have led to residential segregation. This is a problem that affects not just your community, but your own life and well-being. You've probably noticed how some neighborhoods are filled with opportunities, while others are left behind. You've seen how this affects the quality of education, healthcare, and even the safety of the people living there. It's not just a matter of individual choice or personal responsibility. It's a result of deeply ingrained biases and stereotypes that have shaped the way our communities are designed. Understanding residential segregation and bias is essential to recognizing the ongoing impact of historical events on contemporary social issues. By acknowledging the role of bias and stereotypes in shaping residential segregation, you can take steps to address bias and promote greater understanding and empathy. Let's take a closer look at how this works. Imagine you're a child growing up in a segregated neighborhood. You're surrounded by people who look like you, but you're also limited in your access to resources and opportunities. You might not have the same quality of education, healthcare, or even grocery stores as kids in other neighborhoods. This can have a profound impact on your life, from the jobs you're able to get to the healthcare you're able to access. It's not just about individual talent or hard work, it's about the opportunities that are available to you. And this is where bias and stereotypes come in. When we make assumptions about people based on their race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, we're perpetuating a system that's already stacked against them. For example, consider the story of a 3-year-old girl who excitedly pointed out a brown baby in a Target store. This might seem like a harmless comment, but it reveals a deeper issue: the fact that this little girl has already learned to notice and comment on the differences between people. This is a classic example of how bias and stereotypes can be perpetuated from a young age. We're not born with these biases. We learn them from our environment, our families, and our communities. And once we've learned them, they can be incredibly hard to shake. The author's encounter with this little girl is a powerful reminder of the importance of addressing bias and promoting diversity and inclusion in all aspects of life. Another example that comes to mind is the history of residential segregation in the United States. From racial covenants to redlining, there are countless ways in which our communities have been shaped by bias and stereotypes. For instance, in the 1930s, the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, refused to insure mortgages in neighborhoods with high concentrations of African Americans, deeming them high-risk areas. This practice, known as redlining, effectively denied many African American families the opportunity to purchase homes and build wealth. Today, we can see the legacy of these practices in the persistent racial wealth gap and the concentration of poverty in certain neighborhoods. By understanding this history, we can begin to see how residential segregation is not just a natural phenomenon, but a result of deliberate policies and practices that have been perpetuated over time. The impact of residential segregation is far-reaching and devastating. It affects not just the individuals living in these communities, but also the entire society. When we segregate ourselves, we're not just limiting our own opportunities, we're also limiting our ability to understand and empathize with others. We're creating a world where people are more likely to fear and mistrust each other, rather than working together to build a better future. This is why it's so essential to address residential segregation and bias, not just as a moral imperative, but as a practical necessity. By promoting diversity and inclusion, we can create communities that are more vibrant, more resilient, and more just. As the author so eloquently puts it, residential segregation is a complex and multifaceted issue that has far-reaching consequences for individuals and communities. This is not just a problem for someone else to solve. It's a challenge that requires all of us to take action. So, What can you do to start addressing residential segregation and bias in your own life? One small step you can take today is to engage in a conversation with someone from a different background or neighborhood. Ask them about their experiences, listen to their stories, and try to understand their perspective. This might feel uncomfortable or challenging at first, but it's a crucial step in building bridges and breaking down barriers. When you take this step, you'll start to notice something profound. You'll begin to see the world in a different way, as a complex web of relationships and systems that are interconnected and interdependent. You'll start to understand that the problems you're facing are not just individual issues, but symptoms of a larger disease. And you'll begin to see that the solutions are not just about individual actions, but about collective efforts to create a more just and equitable society. Imagine waking up every morning with a sense of purpose and direction, knowing that you're working towards a world where everyone has access to the same opportunities and resources. Picture yourself building relationships with people from different backgrounds, learning from their experiences, and growing as a person. This is not just a dream, it's a reality that you can create, starting today. By taking this small step, you'll be joining a movement of people who are committed to creating a more just and equitable society. You'll be part of a community that's working to break down barriers and build bridges, rather than perpetuating segregation and bias. And you'll be taking the first step towards a life that's more fulfilling, more meaningful, and more connected to the world around you. So, what are you waiting for? Take that first step today and start building a world that's more just, more equitable, and more full of life. Let's continue with the next important learning. You're exhausted from constantly trying to create a more inclusive and equitable environment, whether it's at work, in your community, or even within your own family. Despite your best efforts, you feel like you're not making any progress, and it's frustrating. You've attended diversity and inclusion workshops, read books on the subject, and even tried to have open and honest conversations with others, but somehow, you still feel like you're not getting it right. You're not alone in this struggle. Many of us want to create a more just and equitable society, but we don't know where to start or how to overcome the biases that are deeply ingrained in our culture. The truth is, creating a more inclusive and equitable society requires a comprehensive approach that involves individuals, institutions, and society as a whole. It's not just about attending a workshop or reading a book. It's about making a fundamental shift in how we think, act, and interact with others. This is where the concept of overcoming bias comes in. Bias is like a silent enemy that can undermine even our best intentions. It's the unconscious attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions, often leading to discrimination and inequality. To overcome bias, we need to promote diversity and inclusion, address bias and stereotypes, and provide education and training on the impact of bias. Let's take a closer look at why this matters to you. Have you ever noticed how sometimes you make assumptions about people based on their appearance, background, or culture? Maybe you've caught yourself thinking that someone is not qualified for a job because of their accent or skin color. Or perhaps you've avoided talking to someone because you didn't know how to pronounce their name. These are all examples of bias in action. And the problem is, bias can have serious consequences. It can lead to discrimination, inequality, and even violence. But here's the good news. Bias is not inevitable. We can overcome it by becoming more aware of our own biases and taking steps to address them. The story of Bernice, a Black student who attended a predominantly white high school in the 1960s, is a powerful example of the challenges faced by individuals from diverse backgrounds. Bernice faced discrimination and bias from her teachers and classmates, which made it difficult for her to succeed. But she persevered and eventually became a successful businesswoman. Her story demonstrates the importance of promoting diversity and inclusion in all aspects of life. By creating a more inclusive and equitable environment, we can help people like Bernice succeed and reach their full potential. Another example is the experience of a Black firefighter who was questioned and videotaped by residents while performing his job. This incident highlights the challenges faced by individuals from diverse backgrounds in the workplace. The firefighter was simply doing his job, but he was treated with suspicion and hostility because of his skin color. This kind of bias can have serious consequences, including making it difficult for people to do their jobs and creating a hostile work environment. But by addressing bias and promoting diversity and inclusion, we can create a more equitable and just society. The experience of a Latina woman who was passed over for a promotion at work because of her accent is another example of the impact of bias. She was highly qualified for the job, but her accent made her employer question her ability to communicate effectively. This kind of bias can have serious consequences, including limiting opportunities and creating inequality. But by becoming more aware of our own biases and taking steps to address them, we can create a more inclusive and equitable environment. As you can see, bias is a complex and deeply ingrained problem that requires a comprehensive solution. But the good news is that we can overcome bias by promoting diversity and inclusion, addressing bias and stereotypes, and providing education and training on the impact of bias. By taking these steps, we can create a more just and equitable society where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. So, what does this mean for you? How can you apply this learning to your own life and create a more inclusive and equitable environment? The first step is to become more aware of your own biases and how they impact your interactions with others. This can be a difficult and uncomfortable process, but it's essential for creating change. You can start by paying attention to your thoughts and feelings when you interact with people from diverse backgrounds. Do you find yourself making assumptions or stereotypes? Do you feel uncomfortable or anxious around people who are different from you? By becoming more aware of your own biases, you can start to address them and create a more inclusive and equitable environment. The second step is to take action. This can involve engaging in community outreach programs, promoting diverse hiring practices, and providing ongoing training and education on the impact of bias. You can also start by making small changes in your daily life, such as seeking out diverse perspectives and experiences, listening to people from different backgrounds, and speaking out against bias and discrimination. By taking these steps, you can help create a more inclusive and equitable society where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. Imagine what it would be like to live in a society where everyone has the opportunity to succeed, regardless of their background or identity. Imagine being able to walk down the street without being judged or discriminated against. Imagine being able to go to work without facing bias or stereotypes. This is the kind of society we can create by overcoming bias and promoting diversity and inclusion. It's not going to be easy, but it's possible. And it starts with you. So, what can you do today to start creating a more inclusive and equitable environment? One small step you can take is to engage in a conversation with someone from a different background. This can be as simple as striking up a conversation with a neighbor or coworker, or attending a community event. By listening to people from different backgrounds and seeking out diverse perspectives, you can start to break down biases and stereotypes and create a more inclusive and equitable environment. Remember, creating a more inclusive and equitable society is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, effort, and dedication, but it's worth it. By working together, we can create a society where everyone has the opportunity to succeed and reach their full potential. As we've explored in Biased by Jennifer L. Eberhardt, Ph.D., the journey to understanding and overcoming bias is complex and multifaceted. So, what does all this mean? Let's bring this all together and reflect on the key insights that can help us create a more inclusive and equitable society. Remember, the other race effect shows us how our brains are wired to recognize faces of our own race more easily, which can lead to implicit bias. When you combine this with the power of categorization and labeling, you start to see how these biases can influence our perceptions and actions. For instance, in policing, implicit bias can lead to racial disparities in stops, searches, and arrests, highlighting the need for awareness and training to overcome these biases. Moreover, residential segregation is shaped by these biases, resulting in far-reaching consequences for individuals and communities. By applying the strategies for overcoming bias, such as promoting diversity and inclusion, we can start to break down these barriers and create a more just society. Together, these insights give you a framework for understanding the intricacies of bias and the importance of addressing it in all aspects of life. The difference between a society plagued by bias and one that values equity and inclusion isn't about massive overnight changes. It's about understanding these principles and applying them consistently, one small step at a time. Success in creating a more inclusive and equitable society isn't a destination. It's a continuous journey of learning, adapting, and growing. With these insights, you now have the map to navigate this journey, to recognize your own biases, and to take action towards a more just and equitable world. If this summary gave you valuable insights, hit that like button and subscribe for more book summaries like this. And let me know in the comments, which of these key learnings resonated with you most, and how do you plan to apply them in your own life? Perhaps you have a story of overcoming bias or a strategy that has worked for you. Share it with us. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next summary, where we'll continue to explore the books that can change our lives and our world.